Hello, it's Brad Laurie, or BlockchainBrad, and today I'm speaking with Constellation once again. Today is a very formal and specific update on all things business related for them. Today I have two core members of the team. We have none other than the well-known Benjamin Jorgensen, a co-founder of the startup itself, and we also have Benjamin Diggles. He is key when it comes to business development. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Brad. Excited to be here again, man.
Likewise, mate. Now, today, it's all about the biz. It's all about making sure that we understand the nature of announcements, of proposals, of business potential for Constellation. And we're going to dig a little bit more into the tech to start off with. So guys, let's start off with a bit of an understanding of what Constellation is for those who really need to understand why you exist, what your core purpose is, and what's to come.
Who would you like to take that, Brad? You want me to jump in there?
I think for the intro, maybe you take that, Ben, because
right.
Just to paint a picture before we dig deep into the biz side with Benjamin Diggles.
Yeah, so Constellation, we've kind of defined ourselves as the blockchain for big data. But what we've really built is a directed acyclic graph, or a DAG, that allows for high throughput and scalability. Where Constellation's really focused our attention is around building the Spore platform, which are developer tools that plug into existing applications and onboard external data sets onto our own distributed ledger. And so what we've really focused on for enterprise clients and reaching out to mass developer adoption is really around data validation, focusing on downstream data pipeline security so that you have improved upstream data analytics.
Right. Now, Ben, we've spoken several times in the past, and to paint a picture for what's now emerging, and that is that business potential and commercialization, we need to know that the tech and the integrity of it, the possibilities of it, and the provability is there. You've been building this with the team for some time now, well over a year. Are you confident that you have that fundamental platform, that technological premise that can do what we're talking about today, which is the business side and the commercialization side?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of skepticism at first of seeing this team come together, having a lot of Silicon Valley experience, working primarily in the SaaS space, and having kind of that enterprise business to business dynamic as the core of Constellation. And what's exciting is that we've kind of made that attempt, and we've always articulated that attempt to bridge the gap of blockchain world and research and applying it to real world scenarios. So over the past couple of years, we were actually pretty quiet as we did a lot of research and understanding what existing technologies are out in the space, where did they fall short, and how can we improve beyond just sandboxing test environments and POCs and actually look at scalable and meaningful solutions out there.
Right, and harping back to those fundamentals of the ledger itself, are you confident that you are well and truly in that race to emerge as, you know, a significant startup, as a significant DLT technology when it comes to scalability, decentralization, and all the other components that really afford for a competitive distributed ledger system, and also, you know, a technology that can really be adopted in a very seamless way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really posed to be one of the major champions that come out of this space. Not only kind of in our DNA as a team and where our backgrounds come from, but also kind of in the way that we approach sales and marketing, and how we've built out our organization to accommodate traditional methodologies around understanding customer lifecycle journeys and applying that with a very technologically heavy industry such as blockchain, and bridge that gap.
Right.
So I think we're posed to do more than just structure lightweight partnerships on hypothetical claims and actually start to get the rubber to meet the road, if you will.
Right, and mate, that's exactly why we're here today. Obviously, I've spoken at length with some of your other colleagues in the Constellation team. Wyatt specifically, he's really leading out the technological savvy, that you know, really enabling that code to be meaningful. But today, having another guest from your team with Benjamin Diggles here, it's all about trying to not only bridge the gap, but showcase the emergence of business and commercial value for Constellation. So let's do that, mate. Let's explore this. I want to start off with a permissioned versus permissionless narrative, or suggest the idea that perhaps some may be missing the mark when it comes to Constellation, because in fact, it doesn't seem to be that at all. It seems to be that you're actually valuing and valorizing both sides of this crypto conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, look, when I got into this space, for me to leave Oracle, I had this great job, and I was I wanted to sniff test this team out. Of course, I trust Ben Jorgensen, but I had a chance to meet Wyatt early on because I'm not in the business in my career of making vaporware or shipping vaporware. I wanted to make sure that there was actually a business case here. Mm-hmm. And so what I realized very early on is that there is a real lack of understanding in the market. You know, we may meet with an enterprise customer and they have a guy that's their VP of blockchain or head of blockchain, and they ask really kind of fundamental questions that they don't know the answer to. That's kind of a red flag that they may have promoted that person a little too quickly.
Exactly.
And so in realizing that these enterprise customers are kind of a little bit scared of decentralization, I mean, that's a loss of power in their eyes. You know, the feeling of consolidation is extremely important, of knowing that they have control of that fiefdom. And that's really the way Silicon Valley has been rewarded for the longest time, is the consolidation efforts. Especially working at Oracle, it was a rat race in the partner ecosystem of folks trying to get, you know, swallowed up by these large entities. And so,
and Ben, just to sort of jump in there for a moment, just based on that, and we can keep going. But in the sense of decentralization, I want to clarify a few things with you on your feedback. But is it fair to say that it's about technological decentralization in terms of mechanisms that lie beneath entities, beneath startups, beneath companies and enterprises? I ask you this because, you know, from your perspective and with your background in Oracle, is it fair to say that it's not always about the decentralization of, you know, the flow of tokens, for example, or the flow of money and power, but more so it's about enabling even centralized parties to better their business through decentralized means?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, decentralization and distributed networks aren't unique to blockchain. I mean, this is stuff that predates blockchain, and there's been a lot of different exploratory measures on looking at ways to decentralize workflow. But at the end of the day, when you're talking what you just mentioned about, you know, crypto and tokens and all that, I mean, at the bottom of it all, it's data. That's the big conversation here. And that's, you know, everybody can obfuscate and add layers and talk about, you know, validation mechanisms and so forth. But at the core of it, we're talking data. And for an enterprise to relinquish control of their data in a way that has to, have trust of somebody else handling it, that becomes a really dicey situation. Not to say that there aren't groups out there that have leaned in very hard, seeing that this is the future. They can see the writing on the wall, but I would largely say the vast majority is scared about decentralization as a whole.
Right, very well said. So in that context, Ben, or Benjamin, just so we can separate the two, I'll use the longer name for you, Benjamin Diggles. Now, with regard to the potential for permission systems, obviously there's a bit of a narrative out there that tries to counter the value of permissioned and enterprise-centric systems. But what's your take on this for Constellation specifically? And what's the role that you play in trying to engage some of these businesses that support this permissioned narrative?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's super smart. I mean, when you think about betting the farm and putting all your data on a public ledger, no one's going to be the first in line to do that. I mean, and so then there's all this pushback, especially from kind of the VP of engineering type personas out there that are saying, if it's a permission system, then it's really nothing more than an expensive, slow database, you know? So why are we exploring this? And they constantly start attacking the concept, but those folks don't have the vision or the foresight to play the movie forward and see that you have to start testing this stuff, to start looking at, hey, how do we start to hybrid some of this? Start with the permission system, and then maybe we start taking a subset of our data and using a permissionless system to manage that through an API call. Giving us an opportunity to start to flay out into some hybrid models to pave the path towards that public ledger model, because we're just not there yet.
Right, exactly. Now, in that context, with the DAG as well, that's the fundamental ledger system that you've built in as a technological core. Are you confident that you can see this sort of symbiosis or this intractable connection between the permission and permissionless forms emerge to really showcase that not only can be done, but perhaps needs to be done to really showcase the benefits of blockchain?
Look, I'll tell you what, early on, I was very anti-crypto. Mr. Jorgensen will tell you that all the way. I just was like, if I hear the word crypto one more time, that's not what this is about. This is about the technology. No business is talking about crypto tokens. But then I switched and I turned a corner, as they said, taking the red pill, that crypto is going to be what unlocks this in the future. I mean, that is truly going to be the magic key to allowing utility on these networks. It takes a lot of education to kind of explain that utility model. You know, right now you may be paying Google Cloud for cloud hosting resources and so forth, or any kind of computational throughput. But imagine with microtransactions, you can actually take care of that by tokenizing throughput with crypto. And that makes things very interesting when you start thinking about, you know, autonomous machines that are exchanging value with one another in a decentralized way. That's really exciting. But that said, people are still very kind of having a hard time wrapping their mind around the internet of value, this connected ecosystem where things are exchanging using microtransactions, where crypto really is the power of utility that brings these public networks to life.
Right. And sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in there briefly. A lot of what our ethos is as a company is that in the evolution of the entire industry was that we thought more about cryptocurrency in terms of means of financial exchange. And when you start, and as a financial instrument, and when you see that data in itself is the financial instrument, and data is exchanged in billions of clusters a day and packets a day, and that is the new financial instrument that's exchanged. Now the conversation is much different.
Absolutely.
So now you're looking at permission networks not as a permission financial instrument and isolated network and looking for interoperability on financial instruments, but data as that financial instrument that can be that interoperable between permission and permissionless networks.
Right. And Ben, in that sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
Oh, no, please keep going because I'll edit that bit out. I was so rude.
No, I think I was just kind of hitting the point that there is a ton of room for educating people and walking enterprise customers through not necessarily the financial instrument, but data as the instrument in exchange, and starting with permission networks and slowly easing people up to the vision that we see around interoperability, and that exchange mechanism is data.
Right.
And very few people have done that, like Facebook and Google.
It's true. And Ben, it's interesting you're saying this because it's almost like the chicken before the egg, in that, as you both know, and many who follow the sort of the networks and narratives of crypto itself and the ecosystem that's now building, it's relatively small as a microcosm, but essentially the narratives of money and finance seem to be paramount even now. But if you look at the trajectory of all technological innovations in history, genuinely data becomes paramount very quickly once people start to understand the value of the new systems emerging. Now, do you think perhaps in this sense, Ben or Benjamin, that maybe some have really missed the mark when it comes to really understanding that the data is the fundamental asset? When we're talking about digital assets, for example, many people perhaps may be looking at crypto, for example, as a store of value alone or as some means of accruing wealth. But when it comes to the true nature of these tokenized models, is it fair to say that it's really more about integration, more about how we exchange, literally through interoperability measures, this data, and how we determine value according to access as well?
Yeah, I think Ben hit the nail on the head. I mean, data is going to be the mechanism of exchange that, in my opinion, is starting to quickly become more valuable than money. I mean, you look at, we play a role in the mobility space, and you look at like a Toyota, they're a 250 plus billion ARR company. You take 10 of the leading automobile companies in the world, combine their ARR, Apple still clears them by $250 billion a year. I mean, so it shows you have one tech company that's bigger than the top 10 automotive companies. Then you take FANG, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, you combine them, they're worth more than all the oil companies in the world combined. So you're seeing this crazy shift in data. 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 to 3 years. I mean, these are astronomical numbers that is flooding these groups. And those that don't understand that the importance of interoperating this data, the importance of unlocking it and allowing it to move in new ways, are going to miss the mark. But that's because they're stricken with fear. Again, this is the enterprise that's like, we don't want anybody else to play with our data. And a term that I've coined is decentralization forces collaboration. It forces you to kind of let down your guards and start to play nice with those that you would see earlier as maybe mortal enemies. You got BMW and Daimler that are forming partnerships, Embraer and Boeing. That's a big deal. And that shows that they have a dedication to seeing that, hey, we may only be seeing, a very small bit of what's possible. But once we start adding in 2 or 3 other constituents that are like-minded, that have unique data that we could benefit from and we can play well together, that's what unlocks a real possibility for the future.
Right, and it's really interesting also to hear this discussion about data because, for some time now there's been leading speakers in the crypto space talking about the concept of sound money and, the internet of money. But really, perhaps the narrative needs to really morph into not only that consideration, but quite literally the internet of data and how that's valorized in this new and emergent technology and in that context. So let's explore that specifically with Constellation though. Let's get right into how you're going to prove value utilizing this underlying technology. Now, Benjamin, you are, as a business rep for the team, you really are aware of some of these new moves that you're making on the crypto chessboard to showcase commercial value. Talk us through this recent announcement that's come forth so we can explore the real nature of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm absolutely thrilled to mention that we are under a working contract with the United States Airforce. And it's kind of a big deal for us being an emerging blockchain company. It's a testimony to their group in the Department of Defense that sees that these types of technologies could be the key to helping them interoperate that data. There's a lot of focus on how data is being created, how data is being stored, and then how data is being queried and shared. And so the group that we're working with within the Air Force is called Multi-Domain Command and Control. And to make sense of that for folks in an easy way is it's really just domains are almost like business units that live inside the Department of Defense that create their own data silos. And this data is siloed for a very good reason. Rules of engagement, they don't want that data bleeding over to other groups to mess up comms. There may be security risks. However, when you have these legacy systems that are building these towers of data and they need to interoperate that to make quick decisions, that is a manual nightmare and they are bleeding. In fact, we know from the Air Force, out of all the issues that they're struggling with, that 20% of the demand that's coming from the Department of Defense is around big data. Right. And then it jumps down second place to maybe operations at like 15 to 12%. So it shows the impact. So we're really excited to be working with the Air Force to help them uncover the ways that not only can they interoperate it, but really it starts at the beginning, which is validating and notarizing data, making sure that the stuff that's coming in is known, it's not crap. It's not going to affect the systems downstream, so that when it comes to that place of looking at it as an exchange, and this is really kind of the holy grail of every company, whether they're the Air Force or they're BMW, is that data exchange. Whether that's a monetizing strategy to generate new revenue channels, or if it's a way to make quick decisions on the battlefield. So that's why we're really excited about this piece.
Right. Well, firstly, without any suggestion of FOMO or trying to hype this, congratulations for getting the contract. That was your words, not mine. And that's not easy to achieve, especially when it's a government-backed entity and the Air Force is, second to none when it comes to real credible agencies that are backed by the government. But I want to explore this in real detail so we get, a clear understanding from you, Benjamin, about the nature of this once again. Now, you mentioned before that, there are these silos inside the Air Force and each of them, don't tend to interoperate even within their own ecosystem. Now, if you're tapping into one of them, you mentioned that the domain structure and also the SBIR, that small business relationship. Can you talk us through what this could mean for the Air Force in terms of not only just, facilitating in this multi-domain sort of capacity, but really bridging more of the benefits of and the interoperation between different agents and nodes, essentially, if we liken the blockchain to this, so that there's a better technological conversation happening, there's a better effect with regard to what the DAG can do in concert with better business for the Airforce.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason why we're very excited about the Airforce is that they're really focused on a pathway of commercialization. I mean, we've executed proposals with many government agencies, many of which are focused on the research side, which often gets shelved, where this is rather the pressure to work together to find a transition strategy to making this a commercialized solution. So we're in this to go to production. They understand that that's not something that happens overnight. However, it is something that we're going to continue to put effort against. And yeah, I mean, they're going to be like anybody that we do any kind of pilot with, or we start to open up their systems. We're going to start with a permission structure. We're going to do something safe so they get comfortable. However, what I've noticed with working with the Department of Defense versus many of the enterprise customers in the public sector is that they're way more willing to allow this data to flow. It's very, you would think it'd be counterintuitive that they would be very, risk adverse, but that's not the case. Not to say that they're not risk adverse. I mean, they are the Department of Defense, but they're willing to embrace these new technologies and look at those kind of challenging situations like, what does a public ledger look like? Yeah, it may be areas that we have to really hone in to understand the functions of this, of where this data is going on chain, what's being stored, where are these nodes, in the world, so they kind of wrap their head around it. But once you start to look at the upside of tapping into a public network, the ability to validate this using our consensus model shows this burst of transactional throughput and a way to actually validate and manage this data in a whole new way. So
right.
I'm excited because we're focused on use cases with real customers within the Department of Defense to ground this in reality in a commercialized fashion. Right.
And Ben, I want to ask you as well, or Benjamin rather, with regard to the blockchain itself, you alluded to this before and quite rightly, pre-crypto, the narrative of blockchain was certainly there, and there was a lot of interest among all different enterprise and government parties as to how that could be integrated into their mainstream systems. And that's no different today. There's still strong evidence to suggest that blockchain's been relevant for some time. Now, has that been relatively valuable when it's come to present your proposal, come to present your permissionless systems and the DAG-based technology, given that blockchain's not new?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, at the precipice of blockchain, everybody thinks financial. They think of financial transactions. Bitcoin, that's where it started. But then what comes along with that is identity. Identity was definitely a close second for a lot of companies to start to take a hard look at how they manage OAuth and identity. And then I would say the big use case, and this is not profound, is supply chain management. They're thinking, all right, where are all these different ledgers that are managing this kind of chain? And, you got blockchain, supply chain, they both have the word chain, and it's like, let's marry these together. And when you look at, we've talked to some of the major airlines out there that have FAA traceability issues. And so for them to have that audit trail that shows every spot within that entire supply chain to validate it, extremely meaningful. And the nice thing about that use case that I've noticed is that it doesn't require insane transactional throughput. That makes a lot of these solutions like an Ethereum or Hyperledger a great testing bed to actually show if there's viability with the solution.
That's a very good point, actually, because a lot of people are oversold on 1 million TPS.
Yeah, I mean, but there are going to be a place, when you going back to that stat of 90% of the data being created in the last 2 to 3 years. Those use cases or that transactional throughput that's with these existing protocols that are being managed is just not enough. And so I don't think people have actually allowed their brain to go beyond the financial identity and supply chain management type of solutions.
You raise such an interesting point, because you're alluding once again to the imperative of a good platform to cope with the data necessities, not so much necessarily this financial agenda. And so once again, we see those first iterations of those smart contract systems like Ethereum certainly led the way, but it's not the end point because of the imperative and the necessity for greater capacity to cope with these data needs as we start to see more of these businesses on board onto things like Constellation. You're showing this right now, literally now, by having this contract this is an indicator of what's to come, I would imagine, because it's starting to say, you know what, we're ready to go. We can now work with something that's established to try and essentially reformulate how they can valorize their data in a way that's beneficial to them. So Ben, I want to talk about how that is beneficial, because it has to be clear that there are genuine points of value for the businesses themselves or for the agencies as to why they would do this, beyond just, supporting a technological innovation, because they won't do it unless it's going to help them.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something that I'm not going to name names or I'll get my hand slapped, but I've met with many banks, I've met with many big institutions, and you would think security is at the top of their list, and it's not. It's actually convenience. They're looking for ways to make this easier, faster, more efficient. Security isn't necessarily on their dance card, and we've realized that in the world of IoT. Ben always says the greatest hack that's yet to happen is an IoT hack, and I completely agree with him. But since it hasn't happened yet, people aren't all that worried about the security. But at the same time, since they're not worried about security, they're not thinking about how to interoperate protocols. That's why there's all these unique protocols handling these devices all over. But they're a moot point if they don't work with one another, because you have these isolated systems. Right. So yeah, and I think about the financial piece. It's like, it is important, but people want efficiencies. They want ways to make their workflow much faster, much more meaningful. But like I said earlier, the holy grail, and we hear this from every single enterprise group that gets blockchain, because some of them don't, is the data exchange, the interoperability, the new marketplace. How can they be at the center of that to unlock the data that they have and collaborate in new meaningful ways to create revenue channels that largely are untapped to this day? Right.
Now, Ben, as one of the co-founders, I want to go back to you for a moment and ask you a direct question. Given we're talking about the value of the technology, essentially to enable more efficiency, because underneath that's the scalability technology, does it amaze you right now that so much of the narrative in crypto is actually the opposite of that? It's based on speculation, it's based on pumping prices, it's based on pushing short-term thinking, it's based on so many things that are antithetical to the long-term vision of a tech-centric and team-centric approach to reformulating how we look at technology itself to integrate with business.
Yeah, I think that there is a shift occurring in the space, and last year was hard. It was a hard year to palate. It was a hard year to actually build a business and set expectations straight. Nobody really wanted to set expectations straight. They wanted to moon. That is not a realistic expectation. Right. By definition. I mean, when was the last time we went to the moon? It's the United States. So I think what you're starting to see, and I see this within our community, and I love our community. Our community has latched on to our verbiage and our vernacular around talking about big data and what comes with big data. And it's less a financial instrument, and seeing that organic shift happen within a community is starting to show collaboration, because big data is pretty complicated to understand. It takes a computer science degree of some sort to really understand what we're wrapping our head around, because people are just starting to figure out blockchain, and now we're saying, scrap that, that's old news. We've got this whole new paradigm, and it's going to take all of you to kind of pick each other up, educate on the opportunities and why we matter, and why DAG will be such an impactful solution to data exchanges at scale and having valid data to be interoperable amongst data systems. Right. So I think yes, there is a shilling component, and that's kind of the gamification of the whole space. It's fun, it's lighthearted, it's competitive. It's like playing fantasy football for those of you that live in America. But now there is this kind of expectation that it's like, and something as a team that we live by is not shilling out partnerships. And just because we have a meeting with somebody doesn't mean we have a partnership. Just because we sign up for AWS doesn't mean that's a partnership.
Right. And Ben, just to interrupt for a second there, I want to address a point you made about can be fun and lighthearted. But the point that I think it's also important to raise the question of, is that always the case? Because once it gets to a certain point where things are shilled when they don't have real value, and things are superficially pumped with very, very limited or very watered down proof, then it becomes less fun and much more risky for those who buy into that belief. So the big question is, are you part of this new wave of narrative, quite sincerely, that are actually trying to say, let's look at the proof. Let's look at proof of uptake, proof of adoption first and foremost, as opposed to proof of promises, blockchains of belief.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. I mean, Benjamin and I have talked to maybe 100 out of the Fortune 500 companies over the past year in our research, and not one of them have heard of another blockchain project other than Ethereum and maybe IOTA. So when I say that we're genuinely going out there and talking with groups, we are, and we're hearing a new script. So yeah, I do. We are part of a new roadmap, and it was a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. And now they're starting to see what comes with that, and how educated our entire team is about any given use case and the technology. And that's how it should be.
Right. So do you think, gentlemen, that education's also a fundamental when it comes to transforming how we colour the whole landscape of crypto, so that it comes once again from proof rather than promises?
100%. I mean, I feel like it's our responsibility to distill this message into a palatable and a meaningful way to show people the value, the transition strategy to viability, versus wowing them with crypto numbers or how great our consensus model is. Don't get me wrong, those matter, but not to them. They want to know, is this going to get me a raise? Is this going to save my job? Are we going to be out of business in 2 years because we're mismanaging our data? That's the way they think. So yeah, I would say that, that's been our approach.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thanks for being transparent about that. Now, Benjamin, I want to go back to you to explore the Airforce partnership. Now, one of the things that's interesting is this is just the beginning for a long roadmap in this proposal, contract, and plan. It's built in phases. Can you talk us through from phase 1 and beyond, and exactly what you anticipate now that things are ratified and certified through the contract?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I really appreciate the phased approach. It's a way that we work with our enterprise folks, way we work with consortia, work groups, any type of research. What is the transition strategy? Because you're not going to come out of the gate guns a-blazing, and I think that's a really wise way to approach a new technology like this. The phased approach for us is really taking this first phase as a way to fan out and bring in a lot of the interested parties that want to work with us. And to your point, educate them a little bit on some of the areas they may be soft on, because let's be honest, there's a whole gamut of understanding when it comes to distributed ledger. But even then, showing them less about like, hey, here's how a consensus model works, but here's the outcome of leaning into something that's novel, like a Constellation solution. And then when we get into phase 2, we start to actually build out a lot of those use cases and proof of concepts. A lot of those are going to be working within our own systems, but during phase 2, the big gap, I would say, between those is that we get what is called authority to operate. So we have to go through this to get the proper clearance in order to work with their live data. We can work with a lot of unclassified stuff that we can work within our own systems, but that's kind of the next step, is us kind of learning the ropes of the inside versus having to prove our wealth by, just hustling guts. So it's super exciting because there's a lot of different factions within multi-domain command and control that can see huge value to this. And then just to put a cap on it, phase 3 is really the commercial adoption. That's when Constellation becomes a customer of one of or many of these factions, and we support them kind of from that customer engagement approach.
Right. So essentially, there's that three phase or 3-tiered approach to the startup, or sorry, rather the pilot, moving towards products and proofs and processes that we can start to see perhaps integrate into other government agencies. So I wanted to talk a bit more on the value of research, because people will respond to this and they'll say, well, look, your partnership's really about research initially. How do we know it's going to move into phase 2? How can we have certainty that it's going to morph into a genuinely authentic commercialized based contract? What do you say to that? You know, given that we don't know the full nature of your contract, but certainly all of us want to see the emergence of proof at the end of the phases that there's some real deal meaningful partnerships that have emerged with real productivity in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Ben's point earlier, we've had many of opportunities in the past here to announce partnerships that I didn't feel comfortable putting out there because I want true substance there. But to answer your question, how we do it is we show, we don't tell. And the best part about working with the Airforce is that multi-domain is command and control is predicated on a lot of work we've already done. So it's not like we're going after these and say, okay, how do we make sense of this use case and try to win more of their favor? But rather, how do we take all this work we've done over the last year that the community and most folks don't even know about, the demos we've built, the things that we've proven out, and show them, hey, this is how it works, and kind of winning their minds by seeing the true application of the technology and dumbing it down. I think one of the things that makes people very nervous in enterprise and in government or anybody in big data is it going to, you know, we're going to have to learn a new protocol. We're going to have to learn all these new languages. We don't know blockchain. And that's one of the things that makes Constellation so great is that we integrate into existing systems. We're a lightweight layer that plugs right in. So you can start bringing data in through our state channels, and then it can be queried at any point in real time. So that's been really a great piece to this is, you know, sitting down with the folks, they hear like blockchain, they hear big data, and they think, oh God, this is going to be complicated. Once we start pulling things back and showing how to really deploy, it's actually a very pleasant surprise.
Right. Well, Benjamin, talk us through that. Or Ben, I know you want to jump in. Talk us through the phrase ease of integration in the context of example. So let's say I am not the Airforce, but another entity that's heard about you because of the Airforce announcement. How easy is it for me, if I don't know a lot about blockchain, to integrate with you, and what services do you provide beyond just the technology itself?
Jorgensen, you take this one.
So Brad, I just kind of want to take a step back on the whole research angle. By the first phase, and what we're doing is really kind of navigating the entire United States Air Force, right? Mm-hmm. Like by research, it's not like, hey, let's put together a research paper. It's about understanding how to collaborate with various organizations within the Air Force. So, what you would do in any organization is find an internal champion to elevate you and sell you through the organization.
So really, it's an assessment phase. That's what it really is.
Discovery phase for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Just navigating. In terms of integrating, we're one of the unique blockchain projects that's taking external data sets or heterogeneous data sets and bridging that to a distributed ledger technology. So what that means is that we'll be able to either append our technology onto existing APIs and data feeds, or actually be able to integrate our API with an existing application where a client has the ability to create and customize their data schema or state channel on our network.
Right, so that's awesome, but how do you make it easy for me if I've got my own data schema, as you mentioned, my own agenda, my own APIs? How are you going to make it easy for me to integrate, given that sometimes in the context of really successful technology, they may not have the systems in place and the services in place to make the integration process seamless and easy, and thus they lose business. So how have you made sure that you also can cater for this ease of transition for someone, you know, who or any entity or agency that doesn't really have the knowledge, the background, or anything at all, really as a skill set base to make the switch across?
Well, I think if you're a data scientist, you're looking for a solution that we have. And you're looking to not have to learn a new code like Solidity, but be able to implement within some sort of Java framework, right? And so our technology has been built since the beginning to integrate with various big data stacks that traditional big data or data scientists are familiar with, like Flink and Hadoop and Spark. And so that's kind of where our core is in working with people. This is a very different application and use case that applies to real world data engineers.
So in that context, Ben, being one of the co-founders, is it fair to say that the way you guys are approaching the commercialization is looking at very substantial entities? Again, not to FOMO, but that's where I'm hearing the nuances here, or the sentiment seems to be not only looking at real potential, but looking at those that have the clout and have the backing that's really going to consolidate this reciprocal agenda of data as value.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to sell here, is that there's a whole world of data that has hygiene issues. So is it clean? Is it organized? Is it parsed? And that's having upstream impact on business logic and business management, and AI and machine learning are all impacted by data. And what we often find is that we're talking with anybody that's in artificial intelligence, an AI engineer that's doing machine learning, and they're more about like, just give me more data. Well, if you have still have bad data, and you're plugging bad data into AI, you're going to have faulty AI. And so our whole vision is kind of setting the precedent to have quality data that can be interoperable and used at this level of high computational.
Right, but in that sense though, Ben, with your entrepreneurial experience as well, and some of the others in your team I've looked at who have that business background, as well as Benjamin here, are you still focusing though on those with the essential assets, those that have that clout, as I mentioned, that strength of backing from whether it be an enterprise or a government agency, to really consolidate your start in this? The Airforce is a really good example, but when you're starting to build this out, in your partnership pipeline, are there like entities such as the Airforce to come? That's what I'm alluding to. Or are you sort of just non-discriminatory in the way you approach this?
Oh, yeah.
I can take this one.
We've got a myriad of partners and use cases going on. It's kind of endless, which is scary, but it's also exciting because it's about data and not about a financial instrument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I would add to that, even though there is a myriad of them, we have focus. I mean, we are on a lot of calls, like Ben was saying, and there's a lot that just aren't a fit. And it's because their data that isn't big enough and their pain isn't big enough. They're like, we have some stuff that works pretty good and it's not great, but we're not going to lose our jobs over it, and who cares? But then there's others that it's just insurmountable. And that's why we found ourselves smack dab in the mobility space, is because the automotive space is moving really hard at innovation. A lot of people die behind the wheel. It's a big deal. And there's a lot of data being created. And therefore, when you think machine learning, AI, mobility, IoT, what do they have all in common? They require a ton of data to really operate at their best capacity. And to Ben's point, if it's garbage data coming in, then those things aren't operating in their best capacity. So while we do have a wide net, it's been narrowing fairly quickly. And so the Airforce is a perfect example of an institution that sees that their data is valuable. The management of it is extremely painful, and they know that they're missing out on new opportunities and ways to react.
Right, and Benjamin, I really appreciate your honesty with regard to dismissing some of those that don't have that market fit or don't have that same agenda. Very few do disclose just how much of it is not suitable for a DAG system, or perhaps the agenda that you put up pushing forward. Now, with regard to reciprocal announcements, this kind of contract is a big deal. It's been pushed right through Twitter from your side, but what about theirs? For me, when I'm doing research, I want to know that the announcements are supported from both ends, from the mainstream party and from the crypto startups. So are they also acknowledging this kind of exciting partnership that you've certainly let everyone know about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're cheering us on. They're making things very easy, but are they going to single us out amongst a bunch of people that have contracts? Absolutely not. That's not their business. They want to show a clean level playing field. And the SBIR, their whole focus is sherping us into that discovery process and connecting us with those groups that desire our solution. So I've been in many situations where I almost feel vilified when I come at a contract, like they're just trying to kick me down to prove that I can't do it, where this is largely the opposite. This is a way for them to Sherpa us, to demystify a lot of the inner workings of the Airforce that Ben and I don't have an experience with, but they don't have experience with Silicon Valley SaaS tools and go to market when it comes to technology. They just don't. That's why a lot of their stuff is sitting in the Middle Ages.
Right, and it's interesting too because the approach they're taking clearly is pragmatic, and I think it's important also for us to understand that in that mainstream scenario, many of them don't simply react in the way that crypto does with regard to promotions of new formalized contracts because they're so commonplace. In the Airforce context, they're literally every day. So it is important though that we did raise that question as to how they are approaching and acknowledging this partnership.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely makes sense. I mean, in our press release, we went ahead and used a quote from them. I mean, we've been sharing with the community the announcement as well as the inner workings of what our proposal looks like. But again, even if we get to a place where we're applying our technology, when we get to a place where we're applying our technology in a commercialized way, the Air Force isn't in the business of doing marketing announcements. They don't care because it doesn't do them any good. That's not going to be something that's going to be like, yeah, we made an announcement and now we're more protected. In fact, they've always been kind of a tight-lipped group for good reason. So if the community is expecting them to come out and start waving a Constellation flag, that ain't going to happen anytime soon.
Right. Okay. Well, I love the transparency as well.
Yeah. I mean, most companies don't really announce just partnerships or exploring their technology. Like it's not in their best interest, especially if they're a competitive organization, to be like, by the way, we're doing all of this.
Right.
Take our playbook. Like that to me is more of like a crypto thing. Like I don't know what kind of validation you can look for beyond that. It's on them if they want to talk about some of the partnerships that they have for the SBIR or who's under contract. And I think a lot of interesting press that comes out today is around metrics and how major shifts have occurred based off of a certain technology. And even then, that doesn't get a lot of press. What gets a lot of press are funding announcements and acquisitions and M&A, and like new iPhone releases somehow still manage to get on the front.
And Ben, I'm so glad we're talking about this because the question is, isn't it reasonable to suggest that this needs to happen, as we start to see tokenized economies emerge, new and innovative startups like yours? Isn't it reasonable to look back at what works in the old model, in that legacy model, and bring that forward more in terms of proof? Just like the IPO model, when we see technologies emerge on Wall Street, those series rounds are literally based on proof, of value. As you alluded to with technological announcements, often that's literally hardware that's announced as a new iteration that people can literally and tangibly explore. So does this narrative need to change into more of a proof model?
The narrative of announcing or having other partners announce their collaboration?
Well, just more as a holistic approach, because the tendencies now are more about perspective value. We use the analogy of digital gold, but then when it comes to what we really see in crypto, it's literally a hope-based system, a belief-based system of what's to come, what could come. But when you look at it from a proof perspective, it's what has come, in terms of the temporality of this. So when we explore the value of Constellation, for example, you guys are clearly sending the message. It's what we do, what we've done, we'll announce subsequent to that. So there is that, approach that we've seen in legacy systems and legacy models.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand what you're getting at, and it's on us and other leaders in the space. And I know several companies that are taking this approach to be doers before you announce collaborations, because it'll be more impactful and it'll be more in depth. And so, a lot of what we've done is articulate flushed out use cases, 24-page research papers that we've done. And the focus has been, this is what we've done. We're not about to do this. This is what we've done, and this is what we want to articulate, so that people truly understand and have the research at their fingertips to go, wow, I can make an educated decision on following this company and backing them and supporting them and rallying behind them, because they are being more accountable to the information they send out. So
exactly,
it's pertinent to be accountable.
I would like to add something if I could.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's a two-sided coin. Yeah, we're really big on sharing with the community and the public what we plan on doing from a technology roadmap, because that's key to understanding when we're going to make deposits, when's mainnet coming, how do we onboard node operators, because those things require a swell. Whereas it's a dangerous game to talk about what we're going to do in business, but rather talk about what we've done. Because if we start saying, oh, we're going to close this partnership by this date, knowing from my business development background, that's that's a very stupid thing to do, because there's so many variables. And don't get me wrong, technology has its variables too, but it's much easier to manage that and set a precedence. Because I do think that the public and our community deserves that. But I think it's the right move for us to keep a tight lip until we have things that we...
I totally respect that. And I think we need more people speaking like this, because whilst we all support trustless systems and borderless systems, the real trust is in proof. The real trust is in the value that you bring as you can showcase that in real context. So I appreciate, your candid approach to this as well, Benjamin. I want to talk about the pricing model you have and profit sort of centric and profit geared systems. Try to better understand, are you a revenue generating model yet or going to be? And how is it that you're going to onboard clients with regard to pricing models?
We are a for-profit entity, which opens up opportunities in working with different divisions of the government. For instance, being a for-profit company has allowed us to get a contract with the United States Air Force.
Exactly.
The ways we're trying to bridge a crypto economy, you guys hear me?
Yep. Nice.
Yeah, the way that we're trying to bridge a token economy or crypto economy with real world revenue is in our first stages, we're attempting to burn some of our supply of tokens to represent a partnership. Because the way that we see that is kind of a license for our time and technology that we've built, and that's our extension back to the community. Things that we're exploring in the near future is once we onboard node operators, which we're doing at the end of September, which is a very exciting time for us, is to kind of bridge that gap. Is there a profit share model that can exist? How do we get everybody to participate in the same aspects that we're seeing, driving revenue and support? And then how do we encourage companies like the United States Air Force or the governments like the United States Air Force to use open and public networks?
Right.
So these are all things.
I really want to talk to you about this burn that you mentioned, because it's substantial, the amount that is being burnt in these contractual agreements or in concert with some of the real business and clients that you're onboarding. And the reason why I want to just get really open and transparent about it is because in my role, when I'm talking to many startups about burning, many of them have the agenda of reducing their circulating supply or reducing their total supply, because obviously that has serious implications, beneficial ones for, attention with regard to the metrics of the system when we see speculation as a primary reason for people to enter into this space. So how does burning relate to utility?
How does burning? I think at this point, it relates to utility in the sense that we're kind of removing any potential liquidity into the markets right now that might hurt a value of what somebody owns.
Right.
So there's less potential for a flood of new tokens to come in to the market. And so that bodes confidence in our system and our network and what we're building, and our attempts to bridge our attention of real world partnerships and when they'll be coming onto an open network. And so to satisfy both worlds, we use what we do is we're burning a percentage of our tokens to represent a stake in the network, if you will.
Right. And Benjamin, sorry to interrupt, Ben, but I want to go to Benjamin and get his take on this, because it's fascinating to me that this is happening. Now, Benjamin, you're part of the business dev and the unfurling of the success of the business model. What are your thoughts on reducing supply, increasing scarcity as clients on board? And is this finite by design, this model? If you, say, for example, had a huge number of partnerships emerge in the pipeline, what's that going to do to your supply and your utility model if it's to be the fuel for your whole ecosystem?
put it on mute there for a second. I mean, it's a great question, and I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, I would be fortunate enough to think that we could bring on 10 customers like the Department of Defense all at once. I mean, I don't know if we'd be able to handle the management of that. But what I feel that Matthias, our VP of Finance, and Ben Jorgensen have done a great job on the token economics is kind of playing that movie forward and saying, hey, there is a relationship here, you know, that there is, we're not going to just kind of hope to see what happens, but we're tying our efforts to this this token model, so that way that there is balance as we grow as a company. So it's no different than, in my opinion, of looking at like a Libra who's minting and burning their tokens to keep a stable coin stable. We're looking at it in the way of the network utility in the future, making sure that these deposits that we see having a really great pathway of success, like a clear path, as those that we're essentially staking a bet on. So that's largely the way I look at it. And well, I don't know, Ben.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Really quick, just to, it puts a forcing function on an entity to go buy exchanges, but I don't actually think that a United States Air Force is going to go on an exchange and purchase DAG. We're going to have to act as custodians of the currency. And so by burning tokens, it forces our hand to go back to exchanges and buy circulating supply and buy that product that can be then given to the client. Or
right. Well, I can tell you, gentlemen, that from my experience in this, working in this space, is that whenever we see successful burn models built in, it certainly captures the imagination and attention of the speculative arm or of crypto itself. Are you aware that that would be exciting those who aren't looking at your value longitudinally, but looking at it in the short term? Are you aware that they certainly will be seeking to capitalize on trade and on playing the crypto game simply because of this burn model? We've seen this evidenced already in many other examples, all the way to Binance with their burn model. So what are your thoughts on me stating that?
Yeah, Brad, I think it's a great question, something that we definitely considered at length before we make a decision to do this or to take that approach. And one of the important things that we all have to kind of remember is that the community is what makes up a lot of our projects, right? And not just from our community standpoint, but from being node operators. So what, they're going to be contribute their time, resource, and energy and money to being node validators on our network. And so what are they earning in the process of doing work and contributing compute resources to our network? That is part of the community, and that you have to create confidence in what your token is, what the supply is, so that it's worth their time. We can't tell you what's going to happen. We can only help give people the ability to make an educated guess on where they're going to put their attention.
Right. Okay. It makes a lot of sense. Now, moving back again, sorry to push those tough questions, but Benjamin, recently in one of your, no worries, Benjamin, recently in one of your YouTubes, you mentioned that the focus is on, your words, real viability. Now, can we extrapolate that a little bit more in the context of, once again, the Airforce partnership and any others that you want to disclose, in terms of how we can see this continue through in the roadmap of more real viability, more real use case, and more real success?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about adoption. I mean, we want to see our Spore platform utilized in a way where people are building in state channels with validation schemas, bringing their data on chain in a new way. I mean, that may seem like what I just said, kind of just like whatever, but turning that corner it's really tough. But once it happens, that to me is true adoption. That's viability. That's when the light bulbs go off. And we've even gotten to the point where we've brainstormed some really cool stuff in the background of taking public feeds to show that these validation schemas that bring on even public feeds can interoperate data that's living in the public sector right now. And that's fascinating to folks because it creates new ways to utilize this data in meaningful ways. So that to me is how I define true viability, is when they start onboarding their data on chain through a data schema, through a state channel. That's my opinion.
And really, we're starting to see just the beginnings of this with these pilot contracts. Now, going back to the model of revenue, I want to find out a bit more about the transparency aspects. How much of this are you guys disclosing in terms of pricing, in terms of cost? If we want to know how much it costs for clients of different types to engage, or is this customized and private?
I wouldn't say it's private. I think that we've done a good job of sharing the model, because I think that's really the crux of this. We don't have a rate card. That's not really how this works. It's not like, hey, buy one, get one free. This is
okay. Well, it's good to know.
We're attaching a true SaaS-like model that's really around the data handling, that's palatable. And going back to the kind of microtransaction side, it gets very interesting of us being that layer in between those transactions. So yeah, we are exposing some of that, but for us to just tell everybody how we're going to market with each individual entity, I think would be a dangerous game to play, because we have a lot to learn. I'm not going to sit here and say that we have everything figured out, but we have a lot figured out, and we have trusted partners and champions on the inside that are willing to explore this with us, and what we put in front of them to show them how the movie plays forward from that pricing strategy. It makes total sense, and at least it made enough sense for the Airforce to take us on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that when we do explore the pricing model that we're implementing, we tend to think that the future and the next wave of mass adoption on enterprise using distributed ledger will be some sort of native plugin that occurs on a cloud infrastructure like Azure or AWS or several others out there. And essentially that goes through their ability to pass metadata through a network like Constellation, while then passing into their own data warehouse. Mm-hmm. So for us to see true scalability and adoption from enterprise organizations, those native plugins and containerized solutions into cloud infrastructures will have to exist. And thus pricing structures will actually need to correlate to hosting fees that we become added benefits or added features that we stack on top of existing hosting fees and data packets.
Right.
If you will.
Okay. Now I want to talk to you, Benjamin, again about, given that what Ben said, about essentially the fundamentals of the asset and the fact that it is valuable by design for enterprises more generally and for agencies. But how do you spread this like wildfire, given that you're in a relatively competitive marketplace? Certainly there's scope for others to emerge with you and alongside you. There's no question of that. But you still want to capture a market share. You still want to go beyond the Airforce and really spread this forth, arguably as quickly and efficiently as possible, but based on real proof. So how are you going to approach the commercialization strategy? Especially given that if these phases work and everything goes to plan, you still need ambassadors to lead this out globally.
Considering that over 20% of the issues within the Department of Defense stem from big data, even the call we had today with one of our contacts at the Air Force, they brought up 3 names of folks that they thought could use this. So I feel like the permeation of our solution is going to happen rather quickly. When you look at data scientists spending upwards of 70% of their time managing and cleaning data, that right there is a line item that they can scratch. That's an easy layup for us to start to attack those data management teams. So there is low-hanging fruit in this space. That said, we're not in a huge hustle. I would push back that there's going to be others entering this space that could come near the technology that Wyatt has built. I mean, maybe that's my hubris. I get it. But I really believe in this solution. That's why I've stuck this through and I'm pushing hard. But I think that it's really going to come down to finding those champions and going after the low-hanging fruit. There's so much opportunity out there. It's just a matter of getting the right thread and pulling it, and we're already seeing much evidence of that model. Right,
and what's really interesting about what you said is that, unlike we see networking narratives drive many other startups, you're implying that, having this kind of real deal connection and support from the Airforce and this collaboration, that the networks offered from them, those contacts rather that are non-crypto contacts, that are legitimate entities that they are connected with, that would be arguably invaluable because it's a domino effect of the highest level.
Yeah, and that's why I think when you look at the Airforce, they're all in the same bed together. They're not competing, maybe from certain internal resources, but when it comes to solutions, they're all trying to help each other out because they look at the whole, right? It's a holistic view. And we're seeing the same thing in the automotive space. The tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, there's a lot of collaboration and cross-pollination. Once these companies start to get hip on the fact that we're validating this data at scale in ways that they've never, it's been the missing piece for these large exchanges that they're going after, then it's really about just walking one into the next. We've seen early stages of that already just in our involvement with that space. So exactly. I think it's the 1-2 punch. You got the public and private sector. So we're excited to start announcing some of our public sector type stuff here pretty soon. But naturally, it was great to put a stake in the ground with the Airforce. I
totally agree. So I'm looking forward to hearing more of that second punch. Now, Ben, I want to go back to you and quickly just ask, we always talk about this every time, but runway, making sure that, now that you're starting to make money, the revenue model's working, but do you have significant runway to make sure that Benjamin here has a job and your team is still strong and growing? Can we trust that you've got the war chest full and that you can really build this out for the long term?
Yeah, Brad, as we talked about last time when you asked that, we have sufficient runway and we're building out pricing models and clients with the onboarding of revenue to extend runway in various
I didn't want to harp on that long, so I'm just going to jump in and stop there because it's clear that you're confident in that. But Ben, I do want to talk now about exchanges because there's nefarious actions out there, there's questionable conduct, there's certainly questionable exchanges. Now, liquidity is important, obviously, but there are those that also utilize or, onboard your token onto their platform, and you don't ask them to, I know, but that does happen. Are you concerned about some of the problems inherent with illegitimate exchanges, with dodgy practices, shady practices, and those that just simply
totally. 100%. I've actually talked with a few. It's interesting with the way that space is shaping up. I've talked with a few around leveraging Constellation to validate data and transactions, where we essentially could be a core technology that's agnostic to data and provide some sort of stamp of approval that it's validated, that the data is validated by a community. So I totally see that there's a future in kind of revamping standards in the space, and we can be a huge part of that aspect. Right.
Now, Benjamin, with regard to the prospect of collaborating and working with exchanges, obviously that has to come from them. I understand that. But in that context, are you confident that there'll be more door knocking in the sense that exchanges are of credibility, of high standard reputation and repute? Are they knocking on your door to suggest the idea of working with you to support you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I mention every time I talk with them, is around collaborations, around utilizing our technology and setting a new standard in the space. So we're already seeing a lot of movement on that.
Right. And what about non-crypto exchanges? I really want to touch on that because it's clear that as a business model, as a real deal business, it's no question that you could emerge in non-crypto environments as well. Is that something that you are considering?
Like in the S&P and NASDAQ?
Exactly. I wanted to open that question up more than close it.
Look, all those outfits are exploring blockchain technology and are incorporating it. TD Ameritrade allows you to trade crypto. Those are bridges happening, and I know you want to get away from crypto, but those are bridges happening that there's a lot of exploration around new and disruptive platforms that can invite new accountability in the space.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough, both of you, for a very detailed unpacking of your recent announcements. I wanted to really explore beyond the presentation of the announcement and understand it properly for the audience. So hopefully that has happened. But I want to thank you both for presenting clear understandings of your business focus. Because obviously, as a profit system, as one that's bridging technology with a real business motives, and more importantly, with real agencies that are backed by the government, for example, of the US. This is really significant, guys. This is potentially part of the game-changing narrative we need to see to validate the value of blockchain, to validate the value of cryptography, and also tokenized economies themselves in concert with what we've already seen existent in technology before. So thank you very much for letting us know about the value of the Airforce connection. Benjamin, it's been nice to meet you as well, and congratulations on leading out what has been a very exciting announcement. But I'm looking forward to the future as well with regard to, is this just the beginning for you guys? Is this literally just the start of several pilots, programs, partnerships to come that showcase that your technology means something for efficiency, productivity, and cost saving?
Well, Bradley, the pleasure's all mine. You're a true professional, and this has been a fantastic interview. And as long as there's blood pumping through Mr. Jorgensen's body and my own, we're going to make this happen. And I'm looking forward to the next installment of another interview to show you all the great stuff that we've achieved.
I can't wait. And Ben, thank you, mate, for your time as well. It's always good to catch up with you. Do you want to finish off, Ben, with the final statement?
Man, I think we've said a lot tonight, and I'm really excited by the level of your questions and the feedback we'll get and support we'll get. So I can't thank you enough. I can't thank everybody else for supporting us over the years.
Guys, you're very welcome, and thank you for all of you listening in. Thank you for surviving this very long interview. It's been very, very detailed, but obviously the reason is we want to know all we possibly can find out about quality startups in this space. Gentlemen, all the best of luck. And Benjamin Diggles, I'll hold you to it, mate. Hopefully we'll catch up when we have the next, big announcements such as the Airforce to really explore and unpack.
You bet.
Brad.
Take care, guys.